Okay, well, it's right at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, so let's go ahead and begin. We have a lot of information to cover today. My name is Betsy King, and I am the clinical educator with Hospice Corporation and the Macy Catheter, and we are delighted that you have joined us today for our Thought Leader webinar series to listen to Beth Vogel as she shares her extensive expertise on a child's grief. As far as continuing education credits go, we do offer 1 CE hour for all nurses, LPNs, LVNs, RNs, ARPNs. In order to receive the credit, you will need to attend the entire webinar and also complete a course evaluation, which will be emailed out to you about 30 minutes after the webinar is over. Once you complete that evaluation and return it to us, you can expect to receive your CE via email in several business days. So that's all that you need to do. If you're watching as a part of a group or lunch and learn, please sign the sign-in sheet and have the group leader send that back to us. And when the group leader receives the evaluation email, if you would send those out to all of your attendees so they can evaluate the course and get their credit, that would be greatly appreciated. So any questions about that, we'll go over everything at the end as well. But we are really thrilled that you're here today, and just want to welcome you to our Thought Leader webinar series. Hospice Corporation has been providing these free continuing education seminars for hospice and palliative care providers for the past year. In the 5 years we have been in business, we have traveled throughout the country and been so fortunate to meet so many of you and to become aware of how many great thought leaders there are in this community, and we're so fortunate to have that opportunity, and we wanted to share it with all of the community. So that's where this webinar series comes from. So today I'm very excited to introduce to you Beth Vogel. Beth, as the founder and principal of the Orion Pediatric End-of-Life Training and Consultation Company, saw a need to help adult hospice professionals better understand and address the unique physical and emotional needs of children and their families at the end of life. You know, while most hospice professionals are very confident and comfortable caring for adults, few of them have that same level of expertise and confidence caring for children and meeting children's needs. Sometimes serious illness and the death of a child can have a lifelong impact on the family, friends, and community. Beth is very passionate about helping professionals help children and families navigate this most difficult yet profound journey, listening to their voices and providing the best care possible. Beth founded Orion to help organizations close that gap for children and their families. Her education, credentials, and clinical experience are extensive and provide her with the expertise needed to offer the clinical guidance in this area. Beth earned dual master's degrees in child health nursing and public health. She is a pediatric nurse practitioner. She has a bachelor's degree from nursing, all of her credentials from Emory here in Atlanta, Georgia. She's certified as a pediatric hospice and palliative nurse. She is also an approved HPNA educator and an LNAC trainer. Wow, that's a lot. Before starting Orion, Beth served as the program director for Children's Hospice Program of a large metropolitan hospice. She also spent 9 years at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta at Eggleston as the coordinator of their multidisciplinary brain tumor clinic. She has extensive experience as a facilitator working with bereavement camps for children and families as well. Beth has presented nationally, on the state level, and locally with the professional staff and in nursing education on a wide range of pediatric hospice and palliative care issues. She has mentored adult and pediatric staff and families in providing care for the child in the context of the entire family. It is my great pleasure to now turn it over and introduce to you my dear friend, Beth Vogel.
Thank you, Betsy. Welcome today to A Child's Grief, where we will talk about children and their families who are navigating loss and how we as care providers, caregivers, professionals, family members can bear witness to their experiences and to support them in this club that no one wants to join. Continuing with the housekeeping announcements, I have no relevant financial relationships to disclose. I do want to disclose that where I have used pictures of families that I have worked with, these families, the parents have given me written permission to use these pictures in my work to share with you. As Betsy mentioned, as a longtime pediatric nurse and then as director of a pediatric hospice program, it became quite apparent to me early on that there are many, many gaps in providing end-of-life care for children and for families. So in order to address these gaps, I founded Orion, a small company which provides local on-site training to adult hospice interdisciplinary clinicians to care and become more confident in their care for the children and families that they care for at end of life. Hospice providers bring incredible skills and gifts, but often have not cared much for children. So Orion aims to build that gap, to bridge that gap. I am grateful to Hospi to Betsy and Morgan and all of Hospi for the opportunity to connect with you and to, as you bring your skills, presence, and as we do the work connecting with children and families. This webinar is occurring on Valentine's Day. Initially, that may give some of us kind of a twinge. Here we're talking about children's experiences of death and loss on a day that Hallmark has made full of hearts and lots of roses. 6 years after these parents and this big sister joyfully welcomed the little sister that you see in the picture into their family, the little sister died after an illness lasting several years. There is no grief without deep love. And so what better way for us to reflect on how we can help families as they navigate this journey than Valentine's Day. I think Earl Grolman says it terrifically. Grief is not a disorder. It's not a disease or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity, the price we pay for love. The only cure for grief is to grieve. Briefly today, we are going to discuss development of children's understanding of serious illness, talk about why talking with children is important, discuss what needs to be communicated with children at different developmental stages, and explore some, hopefully for you, very pragmatic strategies and activities that will be helpful to you as you go out in your practice and work with teens and children about death and other loss. It's a big umbrella, and an hour is not enough to hardly dip our toe in the water. So a couple of things that I will do during the hour that I just kind of want you to extrapolate. When I say child, I mean patient, sibling of someone who's ill, son, daughter, granddaughter, grandson of a patient that you may be caring for. Loss, mostly, I mean, I'm addressing death because that's where the bulk of research has been done, but it can be loss of themselves, their own health, the child's health, of a sibling, of a parent or grandparent. Loss can also occur during divorce, estrangement among family members, a parent's incarceration. So I'm using the term loss today, and when I say death, you can substitute grief, loss, for any of those circumstances. And again, when I use the term you, or professional caregivers or family members, you use it in the way that fits the best in your own practice. Every child you encounter is a divine appointment. Paul Fernhoff was the founder and medical director of Hospice Atlanta's Pediatric Hospice Program, and he embodied Wes Stafford's words. As we care for children who are facing extraordinary challenges and extraordinarily hard things, we need to be the village for each other too. Paul was a mentor for me and many others. I would challenge you to look into your story and identify, where do you have a mentor? Find her, and then be a mentor to someone else. The other thing that this picture of Paul embodies is the respect that he had for children. We can't talk about communicating with children without talking implicitly about talking with parents. Parents watch us to see if and how we connect with their child. Not everyone is comfortable with children initially. That's okay. If you find yourself a bit unsettled as you are making your first visit into a home or a hospital, take a few deep breaths and relax. And in all cases, even if that's a teenager, if you convey interest and respect for the child right out of the box, she will lead the way for you. All you have to do is show up, be present emotionally, and listen, and enjoy them, and they will help you. So there are 4 concepts that are really key in children's and everyone's understanding of death in a mature way. All living things die, and we see this we can talk with this concept with children who haven't had a face-to-face encounter with death. Trees lose their leaves, sparrows fall out of nests, all living things die. Non-functionality, meaning that all bodily functions cease when death occurs. Language choice that I would like you to keep in mind is to be specific when you are working with children about your language. And what I mean by that is to be specific in what you are describing, and don't slide into metaphors. Death is the cessation of the bodily functions. It is not like sleeping. And especially for younger children who can't make that distinction, that causes lots of confusion. Death is the quality of being permanent. There is nothing that one can do to avoid death. And both irreversibility and inevitability, we get those confused in our video and 60-minute television programs where a cartoon character might bop somebody on the head and then get up a moment later and run off. What is irreversible about that, a 4-year-old wants to know. So indeed, death means that ultimately when death occurs, that is a permanent state. And CPR has confused inevitability. It is also important to be able to help families to use the language with children that even if a child goes off hospice, for example, or changes from A&D, allow natural death, back to being a code, that it is the body that is ill, it is the illness that is causing that organ's demise, and that there's ultimately, even if we get a brief reprieve with CPR, ultimately that progressive illness will cause grandma's death. A functional, kind of a basic understanding of all 4 of these concepts occurs at about age 6 to 7. That's assuming that the family has not had a up close and personal encounter with death in their family, or they've not had a pet die. Obviously that makes the age stage earlier. And a mature understanding of all these concepts occurs around age 9 or 10. So that's really, we underestimate how early children really have a working concept and then a mature concept of death. And that's important when we are including them in therapeutic activities and helping with funerals. It's important that parents understand what they really do understand. We're going to talk now a little bit about how children in different stages respond to illness and understand grief, death, and loss. And of course, chronologically, we'll start with infants, who are entirely sensory motor beings. An infant might kick a mobile and get a response, and so just coincidentally, they do it again until they have learned. They may be cold or wet, and that sensation tells them that there is learning going on. They don't have any understanding of illness or of causes of illness or causes of separation. They just respond to the parent's emotional states, to separation of caregivers, certainly, particularly as an infant becomes older. They know the difference between the primary caregivers and others. Babies cry for a reason, and really less than a year old, we may not understand exactly why they are crying, since we have done everything we can get them to do to stop crying, but they are likely crying for a reason, even if that reason is colic or an immature neurological system. And I say that so that you can tell parents that we really can't spoil a child that's less than a year old. And that's going to come into play when we talk about how to help toddlers and preschoolers in particular who are navigating separation from caregivers. Functionally and essentially, viscerally, a baby fears that her needs will not be met. And so when we look at interventions, we're looking at that as the underpinning of that. Toddlers, too, don't have any concept of death. They react to separation. They may very well react to others' emotions, particularly significant others' emotions, but also tension in the household. They will respond to a difference in routine with irritability, with sleep, with more crying, and that's all very normal in how they respond. Toddlers and preschoolers' thinking outpaces their language expression, so they understand so much more than they really are able to express to us, and that causes frustration, which can cause meltdowns and temper tantrums. With toddlers, I want you to know that the regression that we hear about, oh, she's not potty trained anymore, she was potty trained and she's not, that the regression is something that the toddler does in order to support his own coping with stress. And what I mean by that is that he goes back to a place developmentally where things were stable, where there was some equilibrium, where he knew what to expect. And so he, along the way, kind of throws out the milestones that he has just achieved because those are stressful. He's still really working on those. He wants to go back to a place where things are more comfortable. So regression supports coping. The fears of a toddler are separation, and they live in the present. So, and you want your interventions to be just in the present. You don't want to give them, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen. You want to just tell them one step ahead of where you are. Preschoolers, and the top of each slide, I have identified sort of age ranges. And again, take that as a ballpark that preschoolers, some 2-year-olds really are very cognitively functioning as preschoolers, and some 7 or 8-year-olds are much younger, not necessarily regressing to toddlerhood unless there is a cognitive or developmental delay. They too, like with toddlers, they have so much more cognitive understanding than their language is able to provide to them. And they really often don't understand what they are feeling. Not only do they not have the language to talk about it. Developmentally, they see death as temporary and reversible. We talked about that a minute ago with the cartoons. And again, like toddlers, they respond to changes in routines and caregivers, parental emotions. Toddlers developmentally, and again, we could spend another hour on just magical thinking, but toddlers experience as a part of their brain and cognitive development a phenomenon called magical thinking. And you may or may not hear about this from a toddler. Of course, we're all familiar with play and imaginary play that toddlers do. But magical thinking is the belief that one's own thoughts, wishes, or desires impact the situation, and that they essentially have control by their thoughts and their actions and over what is happening. So the part of this that you as a caregiver or a parent won't necessarily encounter overtly, but is absolutely part of every single interface with a stressed toddler, is that they think that they caused a particular situation. For example, say that there's a 4-year-old who has played and built a tall Lego tower in the living room, and then little baby brother, toddler brother comes in and whacks it up and breaks it all up, and there's lots of crying and distress. And that situation is fixed, and everybody goes on until 2 weeks later or 3 months later, that toddler or that preschooler remembers that what she said in her head, and mom didn't hear, but what she said was, well, I hate you, I wish you would die. And so then when the toddler or maybe the grandmother comes up with a terminal illness, then that toddler feels, uh-oh, I caused this. So it is really important that in many of your interfaces with preschoolers that you reassure them that nothing that they did or that they didn't do had anything to do with the situation that is now at hand. School age, approximately 6 to 12, begin to understand, have a much more mature understanding of loss. They understand death is real and irreversible. They are still concrete thinkers. They are may very well be sad and lonely. If they have been exposed to a violent death, then they may think that all death is that way. And finally, adolescents and young adults. If young adults are ill, they have likely been in the pediatric system through young adulthood, which is a good thing because adult folks sometimes don't know what to do with teenagers, much less young adults. They have a very mature understanding of death. They understand the physiologic processes that happen. They can explain illness in a very specific sequence of events. They are aware of the immensity of loss. And some of their fears are really found around that immensity of loss, that loss of control, potentially loss of independence, which they have so worked hard to get separated from mom and dad, altered body image if they themselves are ill, and separation from their peer group if their parent or their grandparent is ill, the family structure is changed, and that separation from peer group can be a secondary loss, if you will. Adolescents get that illness is crummy. I would use another word, except husband might not like that. But adolescents get that illness and death and loss is really crummy. And that provides a good segue that adolescents understand that some things in life cannot be fixed. And as we move into part of the hour talking about some pragmatic ways to help children mourn, and as then you go out and do these things and working with families, I want you to keep the image of this little girl and this therapy dog with you. Your presence will help carry the families that you are working with, and then they will help carry one another, because ultimately you won't be involved with them. You need to be able to help them put tools in their toolbox so that they can carry one another. Words are far less important than your presence when you are working with families under major stress, grief, loss. Truly, don't worry about finding the right words. With kids or even with parents, it's really enough to say, I am here with you. Ellen Wolfelt talks about 6 needs of mourning, and that if we are able to address these, that then children, and it applies to adults too, will be able to move through loss. We don't ever get over loss, but we need to make a new relationship with the individual that has died. No small order. Children address acknowledging the reality of death in very small doses. They play, they're sad for a little while, and then they go back and play again. And that's how they do it. We adults could learn a lot from that perspective. It gives them equilibrium, it gives them respite, it gives them ability to put one foot in front of the other the next time in whatever tomorrow's situation is. You want to help parents and caregivers be non-judgmental about how children feel and express their loss in small doses, in how they feel the pain of the loss, how they express the loss. We want parents not to tell children, don't cry. We want parents to be able to understand that the way that the child will best get through the loss and move on to continuing to have healthy relationships with the individual who is no longer there physically, but others in the family as well, is to be able to feel that pain and then for us as caregivers to be present with them in their pain. Kids need to remember the person who died. We all need to remember the people in our lives who have died. This is not just applicable to children, but since our topic is children, parents need you to help them understand why they should not ever take away a child's memories in a misguided attempt to protect the child from pain. And what do I mean by that? Why do we not want to protect the child? Well, we do want to protect the child if we possibly could, but we want to do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, the things that a child can imagine are far worse than the truth often. I remember not long ago, a dad was trying to figure out how to tell his 4-year-old that her mom had died in a car accident. It had been a couple of days, and as far as the little girl knew, she was still in the hospital. Dad knew that this needed to happen. He didn't know quite how to do it. But he understood. He said, the thing that I don't want to happen is for her to think that mommy doesn't love her anymore and that she's not coming home. So we have to help children to not have their imagination think the worst about what is going on. Whatever is happening is hard enough already. A second reason is that we won't always be there to protect them, even if we could. And if they haven't developed skills to deal with suffering and trauma, tools in their toolbox, as we like to say, they won't be able to do it the next time that grief or suffering occurs. And as we all know, none of us escape this life without grief and suffering. And the third reason is probably the most important. And that is that truly a child can live with anything as long as he or she is told the truth and is allowed to share that truth with loved ones and is allowed to feel and to share the feelings, those natural feelings, those sad, hard feelings have together when families are suffering. So in my practice, I have indeed found that certainly there are times when the parent is in the midst of a myriad of feelings, and it's really hard for the parent to get to this place. So that's our job, to encourage and reaffirm and affirm with the parent that as long as the parent is present and emotionally present and together with the family, that children can get through just about anything. They can grow and ultimately thrive. When someone dies, we have to develop a new identity. Am I still a big brother? Do I still have 2 children? I mean, do I have 2 children now, or do I still have 3, a parent might say? Grief is individual. Families need to come to answers to these questions as to what fits best for them. If you can encourage parents not to ask the children to take on the roles of the loved one who died, then they will be better able to develop a new identity, to develop a new relationship with the individual that has died. And that's not only siblings, but if grandpa lives with you and took out the trash, then it's good that it's not always James's responsibility to take out the trash, to do what grandpa did. James needs to be able to get to a place where he can have a new identity with grandpa. Children grieve losses again and again and again. Every time there's a new developmental stage, every time there's a new loss. It can be a minor, everyday kind of a loss. Children grieve the death over and over and over, and in deeper ways as they mature. And what we need to be able to do is provide that child with continuing support and presence, both in the family system, but also for parents to be able to rely on significant others, family friends, to be able to give them some respite, but also to be a safe place for that child. And it's okay for caregivers not to have answers. There are no answers to why do people die? Why did Susie die? There are no answers. We're going to talk about some specific techniques, if you will. That's a little specific, and what I mean instead, rather, is to talk about some ways that, so some things that you can have in mind that to begin with, the next few slides are going to apply to children wherever they are on the developmental spectrum. It's kind of the approach that you bring. Then we'll talk about them in more specific age groupings and things that you can do. You want to encourage parents to talk during in-betweens and while walking to the car, or while walking or in the car. Often children talk better when there's not eye contact involved. So have parents utilize that. It may not be necessarily that that's the best time for the parent, but if we can get to the parent to be thinking about times when there may not be quite so much eye contact, dinner table might not be the best time to talk about hard things. Fatigue and hunger together is a bad combination. Somebody taught me the word hangry once, and indeed, late afternoon, the bewitching hour is called that, probably for a good reason. Just be a person is responding with genuine emotion. It's okay for you as the professional caregiver to exhibit emotion, but not to the place where then the parent is needing to worry about you. Then it's not about their child anymore, it's about you. And same with parents and children. Parents should not be, they should share their feelings and their expressions of emotion so that they can role model that. Children notice your verbal and nonverbal communication. So you want to be mindful of your facial expressions, your posture. You want to smile. Call the child by her name. Play on the floor. There is enormous benefit in setting aside that power differential between a tall adult and a small child, or a teenager even. Sit down on the level of that child or a teenager when you're having conversation, when you're playing a game. You want to show interest in them. We all like somebody to show interest in us, and that will open the gateway, as I mentioned earlier, to kids being responsive to you and to make that so much easier. Reflecting back to them what your understanding of what they're saying is a really good way of not only discerning whether you have understood it correctly, but it also gives validation to what they have said. And even if that's something that's not so socially acceptable, in your reflecting of it or in the parents reflecting of it, you're just stating what it is without judgment. You are validating those feelings. You are validating that conversation. Helps kids feel heard and that their opinions matter. Another phrase that is very useful in all kinds of ways is, can you tell me about it? Also, how did you feel when that happened? Try to not use why questions. Kids want to tell stories. Sometimes they'll tell it from the middle to the beginning to the end. Sometimes they'll tell it in order. They want to tell stories. Can you tell me about it is a good entree into that. If you are concerned that there are going to be difficult subjects arising, then asking the parent, inviting the parent to join you outside of the child to begin with, so that you can talk about how you might approach the conversation, will then enable the parent and you to have some lead and some idea of what you're going to talk about when that conversation indeed arises. Follow the child's lead. Answer what is asked. You don't need to offer lots and lots more details. Listen to what they're asking, answer their questions. If they want more information, they will come back and they will ask another question. But if you have listened and answered, then they know that you're a safe place, that parent is a safe place, and that's really what we want when we're trying to talk with kids about anything. It doesn't even need to be hard stuff. Two really important and useful questions that I encourage you to put in your back pocket so they are convenient is ask, is there anything you're worried about? And you will hear all kinds of things that you had no idea. It focuses the worry on the child, or focuses the conversation on the child and enables him to respond to what he's concerned about. Sometimes, especially teenagers have developed, older children have developed protective mechanisms. They know that this is stressful and that they don't want to cause more distress, so they protect parents. So, and the second question is there anything that you think your mom or your dad or whoever the people in the family are, you by now have learned family systems, is there anything that you think your mommy is worried about? And you will get, again, you will get good responses to those two questions. And again, a reminder, especially with young kids, anything that you did or didn't do did not cause this to happen. And you can repeat that at various points. That is a good thing to remind kids of. If the child is ill herself, she will likely want to protect parents, and this is 4-year-olds as well as 14-year-olds. Certainly soliciting significant others to be available as possible provides a safe space so that the child doesn't necessarily have to speak their worst fears to the parents. Sometimes that's not comfortable, and an intermediary who knows the family well can be in that space. Two things that really kids who are themselves terminally ill want to know is that the parents and the family will be okay. So it's really important, and there's a lot of research on this. Kids just, and empirically, kids sometimes don't die for long periods of time until parents are able to say, we are going to be okay. We will miss you and we will love you every day, but we will be okay. And we will always remember you. Those are two things that, that are really important to convey, to have parents say out loud, not just to assume that everybody knows that, to say out loud to children. Play in grieving children helps them communicate, it helps them process their loss, achieve equilibrium during a very stressful time. But literally, the neuroscientists have discovered that play literally helps the brain develop. So not only do children need time to play to release whatever stress they are in the midst of in grieving, but indeed to achieve better brain development so that they can build flexible, adept brains, which then they will go on to continue to use both in this loss and whatever adjustment to things in the future that they must make. Infants and toddlers, I'm going to talk the next few slides about some specific ways that you can play with infants and toddlers up through talking with adolescents. On the left of each of these slides, and I won't repeat them for time involvement, but on the left are the developmental tasks that your interventions really are working toward. Toddlers, you want to supervise always. Don't let a toddler or don't let a parent let a toddler out of their sight. Expect meltdowns, we talked about that a moment ago. Use concrete language in your play. Stay in the present. The two kinds of play that are the most important for toddlers and preschoolers are outdoor play and imaginary play. Unstructured play in both instances so that adults are not leading the charge, but really are letting the child lead where things are going. You will see both toddlers and preschoolers, if you listen, you will hear them work out a lot of their stress in the current situation if they have unstructured play opportunities, and arts and crafts and imaginary play fit into that very much as well. Again, with toddlers, you want to tell them only what is going to happen very next. You want to try to maintain routine as much as you can, and familiar caregivers staying in the present. Preschoolers is a continuum of toddlerhood in much more sophisticated way. Unstructured free play is so important for preschoolers. Again, supervised, but unstructured, with as much as possible without adults leading the charge. They will and they can. Time stops, it becomes blissful. They know how to play. Arts and crafts are good for that. Again, provide the paint, provide the crayons, provide sidewalk chalk is great. Things that they can use to express feelings that they're having. You can ask preschoolers, what does that color mean? Tell me about that green that you used all over the picture. Tell me about that green. Again, open-ended questions, not yes and no questions, asking the child to tell you about. Again, use that phrase, please tell me about what you did here. Again, using concrete language, and again, trying to encourage parents to resist saying, stop crying when it's time to come in. School age kids, they're all fun. Kids are amazing. School age kids are so curious. They want to ask all kinds of questions. You need to answer their questions truthfully. This is where if you see that talking about prospectively their own death or grandma and grandpa's death is on the horizon, that you want to pull out the parent and say, okay, this is going to come up, and Johnny is really a bright guy. He's going to ask. He's going to ask you. He might ask me, what's going on? And I want to be able to tell him the truth. I don't want to lie to him, but I want to respect what you want for us to say. So let's talk about that. Typically behind parents' reticence, reluctance, or active, overt, no, I don't want to go there, and I want to protect my child instead, typically what is behind that is fear. So if you can get to the fear of what a parent is fearful of, i.e., for example, well, I'm afraid that my 5-year-old won't be able to handle the fact that her baby brother is dying. Then you can talk about what does it mean to not be able to handle it. You can, as the care provider, review, and you may need to talk again about how, if they do things together, that the 5-year-old has amazing resilience, and with the parent's support and emotional presence, they will be able to get through it. Again, arts and crafts, unstructured outside play, lots of energy release, lots of ability to express oneself through play. Often school-age kids, they don't speak about it, but they may feel different, and language, again, may be insufficient to be able to speak to that. You want to listen for that. It's okay for you as the caregiver or the parent to take initiative in bringing up hard subjects. Again, maybe reverting back to tell me about how that was for you. And finally, adolescents and young adults are sometimes playing, and if it's not in the individual herself who is sick, if it is, ways that you can modify play. Maybe she can't do soccer any longer, but maybe she can be the scorekeeper for the team. Of course, peer connections are so important. Prepare peers for what they may see if the child herself is sick. Peers will be able to roll, but if the teenager has tubes or has lost a lot of weight or has a different haircut, just prepare the peers for what they're going to see, and you will be amazed. They will just roll with it, but they do need preparation. It's really hard for them to walk in and navigate their own feelings as well as prospectively the teenager's feelings. Have parents, to the degree that they can, tolerate and explore anger on the part of adolescents. Again, going back to exploring their feelings does a lot to dissipate anger. Sometimes a concern of safety arises, and a way that can be very effective in addition to talking about that. And again, we could do a whole nother webinar on talking to teenagers, but utilizing a compact or a contract with the teenager, use your social workers to be able to have boundaries that the teenager is comfortable with, or release valves that there's somebody that they can call if there's a safety issue. The last couple minutes, I would like to share with you some reflections from some folks who have been there. In my practice, certainly, and I suspect this is true for all of us, that we learn so much by the people who are really there, who are in that place. And so these first two are from children who were very young when their dad died. The first is from an 11-year-old son whose dad died when he was 2. And he talks in that first paragraph about missing his dad in the routine, the normal things. He understands that mom needs to pick him up, and that dad isn't there to play games or to go to his matches. And indeed, years later, there's a I got to put one foot in front of the other, but there's always a sadness there. I think as we, especially in our personal lives or in community, not only in the child or the family that we're addressing and working with at the time, but to be mindful that kids carry these things for a very long time. He says, it's also really hard not to have any memories of him, to know he was this amazing dad, but not to remember how it felt to have him in my life. So with your parents, work with achieving memories, talking, activities, anniversaries that keep the individual in the life, even though it's a changed relationship with the child that remains. The now 14-year-old daughter, whose dad died when she was 4, talks a lot about being sad. She thinks about death a lot and has some anxiety about things that people do every day, like driving, that are dangerous. And then there's things that we don't know about, like cancer, that are very unsettling. And it's hard because I really don't remember not feeling this way. I've never experienced, or I don't remember not having loss. All of my memories are mixed up with loss. Even if they're good memories, they remind me of my loss. And so they're all mixed up with sadness. This was a picture that she drew of dancing with her dad many years ago. She was probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 when she drew the picture. And she and her dad both have big smiles on their faces. So again, those anniversary things are so important. Encouraging families, encouraging parents that this is the right way to go. Reflection from a big sister whose baby brother died at age 2, about 40 years ago. And she says, beyond being profoundly sad and having the bottom drop out of her world, well, that in itself says a lot. Her parents were doing the best they could for her and her brothers and sisters. She was thinking about colleges. She was the eldest. Her parents weren't emotionally available to help with those decisions. And as a consequence, she thinks she didn't make good choices. She too talks about being different. It wasn't anything that was vocalized, but she felt that. She had had a baby brother die. Her parents coped by not talking about his illness or his death. So the cancer, his hospitalizations, my mother's absences to be with him in the hospital were all unexplained. We weren't prepared for death, and we never had the chance to grieve. And we certainly didn't understand that grieving was part of the healing process. Help your parents to know that grieving is the only way to heal. And finally, from a mother whose child died after a long, difficult illness. And she wrote this to care providers, to all of us. You must have the courage to step in and say what needs to be said, even if it's upsetting. It's such a gift when a clinician can be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I want to look at the insurmountable hill of caring for my seriously ill child and the dirt in your shoes and the flag in your hand. Show me your humanity because we are in this together. Please know, she goes on to say, how thankful and grateful we are to you for sharing your gifts with us, even if we don't say it out loud. Often words can't possibly convey the kind of gratitude that we hold in our hearts. And sometimes we don't even realize until years later how we feel when the dust has settled a bit. We thank you for your courage, for your heart, and for running into the fire when everyone else is running away from it. I want to leave you with hope changes for families who have experienced grief, who have had a significant other, a member of your family die. I think that we as clinicians can help families. We are in such a pivotal place to help families maintain hope, changed hope, by helping them articulate and redefine what hope looks like. Hope looks very different at the beginning of an illness than it looks like at the end. But if we have reframed it, it is there, in light of the changes that are occurring in that individual's lives and the lives of the family. It is an act of love to remember someone's life. So we have a couple minutes, and Betsy is going to address questions, correct?
Thank you so much, Beth. I had to get my emotions in check. That was a fabulous, fabulous, helpful presentation. I know that everyone took away so much valuable information, things that we can do to help support our families and children. So we have a plethora of questions that have come in, and I know in the interest of time, respecting people's times, we don't have time to answer all of them. And just to let you all know, Beth has so graciously agreed to answer every question that has been submitted, either with registration or during the course of the presentation. She's going to answer every question and send those questions and answers out via email in the coming day or so, or week, or there's a lot of them. So you will be getting an email from her. But let's get to a few of them while we have time. So one of our colleagues wants to know if you think that grief camps are really effective.
Great, great question. Yes, absolutely, with a bit of a caveat. There is more and more research on both grief camps and also their cousin camps that are held for children with particular illnesses. heart transplants, cancer, for example, and there's really even more research out there with those. The unequivocal answer is yes, and for two main reasons. One is that it enables children who feel different because of what has happened to them be with people who also understand without words, and both in terms of camps for kids and family camps where of which there are also, I think there are more models of grief camps that are just for kids, but there are some models throughout the country of family camps for grief where the families come together, might stay in a cabin together and participate in activities that are addressed, or the goal of the activities are to address those 6 stages of mourning that Wellfelt talks about: identifying a new identity, working through the grief with people who, not only your family, but also other kids who get it. At school, typically there's nobody else that, well, there are, but it's not until there's a grief group done that, oh, so-and-so has this, and in the days of HIPAA and confidentiality, all of that gets complicated. So that gift of a child being able to come together with others who understand the same things that they are going through is just, as they say on that commercial, priceless. The other total plus, but with the little caveat, is that grief camps are also a place where children with therapeutic facilitators can really do some work. Grief camps are not therapy, and they're not designed, nor are they staffed as such, but they are a place where trained facilitators can provide and work with kids to do activities that will help them with those 6 tasks of mourning. But the caveat, the key is that they have to be trained. It doesn't mean that volunteers can't come together, but that there needs to be specific training of those volunteers by experts in the field. So really great question, and yes, and there are, of course, everybody's from different parts of the country. You can Google grief camps for kids, and I also, in what I will send you, will be some resources, and there will be some resources on grief camps there. Great question.
Great, thank you, Beth. Well, before I ask the next question, I have quite a few people asking to go back one slide so they can see the references again. I think you're going to talk about that at the end. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So hang on.
Happy to go back, but
there you go. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the cultural aspect of grieving for children? We've had a couple of questions come in about how does the cultural aspect of grief different for children in different cultures? Big question, but just
big question. We could do another webinar for another hour on that.
Uh-huh.
In the big picture, the children are a part of the community. They are part of many communities, and siblings, parents, nuclear family, extended family, school, churches, places of worship, activities. Children are members of numerous communities, and so already, if you think of each of those entities that the child participates in as having a culture of its own and being connected to adults and kids who have that particular shared interest, for example, then that's one way to look at how a child's grief really ripples, is the stone in the pond, and really ripples outward to so many people. It is, there is one research that tosses out that a child's death on the very first run impacts 356 people, and that's kind of the beginning of the iceberg. So culture, meaning that the child is seen in a lot of different activities. Secondarily, in the different specific cultures, different religious expressions and experiences, different ethnic cultures all have different ways that they communicate, and traditions. The best thing to do is ask. We are not required. We should not assume that we know, and nobody's holding us to the standard of knowing. Ask the family that you're working with. Tell me about some of the things in your, particularly if it's an ethnic culture. Tell me about some of the traditions. Tell me about, and this is often the case for those of you, especially nurses in hospice. You want to ask questions about culture of body preparation at the time of death, way before the death. I will just toss that out, but that because that is something that families sometimes don't want to go to, and then you're 2 o'clock in the middle of the night, and it gets pretty interesting. So there, but ask. My response is ask the family. They're the expert.
Great answer, Beth. Thank you. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then you're going to have your work cut out for you, Beth, answering all these by email. But it'll be a great resource for people. But I know that you wanted to mention this too. We've had quite a few people ask about, can you recommend age-appropriate books for children dealing with loss and grief?
There are many out there. On my website, there is a tab that says resources, and you will see a collection of 4 different categories of books. Some are for children, some are for adults who are family members of children, some are adult books about grieving. So I would be delighted if you wanted to get that resource list from my website. There are, I will, as Betsy mentioned, I will also send a listing of some resources, some online resources in particular that are national, that can be resources helpful with children. I would be happy if you want to reach out to me if there's any way that I can help you in your organizations moving forward. I would welcome that collaboration. And a car box. I will include a quick and dirty list of simple things that you can put in your car box that you can do with kids: icebreakers, balls, some sidewalk chalk, just a quick, inexpensive list of things that you can have available to you as you go out and work with kids.
Thank you so much, Beth. I'm losing my ears. That was just so helpful. I know on behalf of all of the clinicians who got to be with us today, they all appreciate the time you sharing your expertise with us. So any information any other questions or information that you might need, you can go to the macycatheter.com website. And we have monthly webinars and trainings, informational webinars on the catheter as well. If you're interested in that, love to see you on one of those. And just thank you again so much for joining us today. And a huge thank you, Beth. It was very, very valuable presentation. Thank you, everyone.